Wow, so Brandi, you are in Nashville,
I
right?
am. Yep. I'm right outside of Nashville and Franklin. So a little south of Nashville. And it's kind of like a modern Mayberry,
Yes, I
for lack
know
of a better
Franklin.
description. Yes. Yeah.
My husband is a Civil War buff, and
Yes.
so we actually visited Franklin years ago on one of our anniversaries just to go out, look at the battlefields and
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I'm about 10 minutes from downtown.
oh, that's awesome. It's also a place where a lot of publishers and editors, I don't know why, but they just love to live there.
Yes, there are ton and authors. There are lots of
Mhm.
authors here as well. So yeah, lots of media comes out of Nashville for sure.
Creatives,
Lots of
right? And so,
creatives, that's for
yes.
sure.
Wonderful. I'm so glad to get to talk to you after reviewing your book and some
Thank you.
things about your ministry is just incredible. I just want to introduce you very briefly to
Mhm.
my audience, but Brandi Wilson, she is an author, she's a coach, she's a speaker, and she has been in leadership and women's leadership for more than a decade. And she leads a nonprofit that's called Leading and Loving It, which is created to empower women to love life and ministry. So you really help women in ministry, right? With this
Yes,
nonprofit, which is
yes.
awesome. She has helped also plant two churches, and she's passionate about walking alongside single moms and divorced women as they navigate parenting and life. And there's a reason for which this in the past 6 years has become very dear to your heart, Brandi. So we all know that everyone, every believer goes through difficult seasons in life, and some of them seem to be more than we can bear. And yours happened in 2016. Do you want to tell us a little bit to my audience what happened to you?
I would love to. Um, I married my college sweetheart, and as you said, planted a couple of churches, had three sons. And the last church we started was Crosspoint Church here in Nashville. And I just loved being part of that community. I loved being part of the staff family. I, did life and had those people in my home on a regular basis. And in 2016, life fell apart pretty publicly for me. My husband of 20 years chose to walk away from our marriage and the church in our family unit. And I was devastated. It happened pretty quickly, but I think we all know that when your life falls apart publicly, it's been falling apart behind the scenes for a really long time. And now that I'm removed from that, I can see signs that it had been falling apart for a really long time. But yeah, in a matter of a couple of days, he walked away from his position. He had already moved out of our home. And I just found myself at a place where I was going to have to start over. He asked for a divorce. I never foresaw that for my life. I, walked down the aisle thinking I was going to,
Right.
be in a rocking chair beside him watching my grandkids play in the yard. Um, but I was, faced with the crossroads of starting over.
Mhm.
And that's what I chose to do. I have been on a really long journey of healing, still on that journey in a lot of ways. But yeah, just how do you start life over again and just figure out, am I going to make it? Am I going to be okay after what has happened?
Right. And you chose, of course, the better road, right? Because
Yes.
I always say there's a bitter road and the better road, and
Yes.
you chose the better road. And we know, we as believers, we know that in Romans 8:28 is very real to those who really seek the Lord in times of pain. He is going to use that, everything that we go through, good, bad, for his glory and for to help for our purpose, the purpose that he's called us into. And so we know that, and that's what you did. You chose that. And this is a subject that impacts so many people. I'm a child of divorce. My parents divorced. My I I've been married for 20, almost 24 years. My husband was married before, and he has a story that's pretty similar to yours. His wife um, chose to walk away from the marriage with another man, in his case. And so he knows, I don't know in person that pain, but he went through that same situation where it wasn't his choice. So I know that this conversation is going to hit home for I'm even thinking about several of my friends who I know who have been impacted by divorce too. It's a very important thing. The beautiful thing about it is that you ended up choosing the better road, and you wrote this book that's being launched, right? It's brand
Yes,
new book, right? it's
yes,
it's, it's
yes,
fresh off the press, and it's called Better Than Okay.
yes.
And this book recounts how you confronted the grief and the heartache head on, and you learn how to rise from the pain. You say that this book is not about how your marriage ended, it's about what God chose to do in you, and as you chose to begin again. I absolutely love that.
Thank you.
And so I know that writing this book was a process that was not easy, I'm sure. You have courageously revisited the darkest time in your life in order to offer hope to the women who are facing divorce today. So why did you choose to write Better Than Today at this time?
I think honestly, Patricia, I needed a lot of healing. I think there's a lot to be said for choosing to write out of my scars and not my wounds. I didn't want to write a book that just, for lack of a better term, became a tell all about why my marriage crumbled. I wanted to write a book. I felt like God had so shown up in my life in small ways and big ways, in ways that I never expected. And that's the story I wanted to tell.
Mhm.
I wanted to tell the story of how, when I was at my lowest, God was there with me, and He could handle my doubt, and He could handle my frustration, and He could handle my anger and my tears. Um, and I wanted to be able to help bring that hope to other people. I didn't want to create a project that just helped people magnify their pain. I wanted to create a project that helped people work through their pain. Because as you said, life is hard, and we're going to go through stuff that is
Mhm.
hard. And life can also be really amazing and beautiful at the same time. So I think in order to be able to grasp on to the goodness when it happens, we have to be willing to walk through those hard times and realize we're not alone, that God is there with us. And I really felt strongly about taking the time to heal, so that when I told my story, it was a survival guide for those who were also suffering from something similar.
Mhm. And I know that alongside this road, you have had many people that have reached out to you and that helped you. Tell me a little bit about the church. I know that the church a lot of times, I don't think that it's every church or every group of believers that uh, that will come alongside and help you out. I think that the churches have historically like to criticize the divorced women. I know my parents, like when they got divorced, my mom was like, nobody wanted to deal with her. Of course, this was back in the 80s when it happened, but still, was that your experience? How did your community come alongside?
Um, I am really blessed to say that was not my experience with Crosspoint. They were actually really amazing to me. I still have lots of relationships there. I have a relationship with the new leadership there. It's not the church I attend any longer, but they were really great. There is I don't feel like there is a handbook on how to walk through really tough situations like this.
Yeah.
But I feel like they did the best they could with what they knew at the time. And they showed up to support me. The staff actually moved my sons and I into the house that I purchased after the divorce. The creative team at the church put up the basketball goal that my kids play on now, and it's the same basketball goal we had at our old home. I still meet several of those women from staff on a regular basis for coffee and dinner and just to catch up. So my path still crosses with theirs. I feel very blessed that that is my story. A
Mhm.
lot of people, that is not their story, and my heart aches, whether it's a pastor's wife or it's just a woman in the church. I think part of the reason women don't feel accepted in the church post divorce is the church just almost doesn't know what to do with us.
Mhm.
It's not intentional. Uh,
Yes.
Overall, I don't think it's done with any malicious action. It just feels easier to put us in a group for divorced people. I think
Yes.
it's super important for women to hear, and divorced men. My audience tends to be women,
Yes, of course.
but it's really important for women to hear that they are wanted, and that their presence matters. And because it is hard as a divorced woman to walk into a church where every person you run into seems to be part of a happily married couple.
Oh,
Uh,
yes.
that is tough, and that's what it feels like.
Mhm.
Is that the truth? No, but at the same time, that is what it feels like. So I think just creating atmospheres where divorced women feel welcome, where they feel like their family unit is enough, and where that there are illustrations given from stage that actually match their life, what it's like to be a single parent. And as I've said, I think often churches don't know what to do with the divorced women, so a group is created and we're kind of put there. But yeah, I think that daily support is something, that regular support is something that we're looking for. And a lot of us have not chosen divorce to be part of our story. It's just something that kind of unfolded. It was a decision that was made for us that we're trying to do the best we can with. So yeah, that acceptance is huge for women to feel like they have a place and that they're supposed to be there, and that they're loved. When the person who's supposed to love you the most leaves, that's a devastating thing to walk through. When your family unit unravels, your heart aches. So we're looking for that connection and that longing.
Absolutely. And what an important ministry for a church, really, if you think about it. If you think about even the concept of like they say about 50%, I want to say probably even more of marriages end in divorce. That is in the church as well. I mean, I'm
Yes.
sure that it's not as the percentage is not as large, but it is. I have a friend who we talked to. She's a divorced woman, and she we were talking about that she feels like that there's not a place for her, because you have the young adults, or which they're young adults, a lot of them are single. And then if
Right.
it, especially in the smaller churches, bigger churches I think have more, but smaller churches a lot of times I believe that they do fail in taking care of the people who are trying to start again,
Yeah.
like you said. So yeah, very, very important. Your ministry
Mhm.
has really focused a lot on helping this type of situations as well, right? Can you tell us a little bit more about your ministry?
Yes, I'm with an organization called Leading and Loving It. And as you said earlier, we exist to help women leaders love their life and ministry. And it was started by my best friend, who is a pastor's wife at a large church in Vegas. And she actually started it for her staff to be able to connect with her staff. And what she found is that it was more women outside of the church that she was reaching. So she and I actually connected online, and she asked me to come beside her and help move this ministry from just being a blog,
Hmm.
to something that makes a larger impact. So I often say, like, we were a mom and mom organization rather than a mom and pop. We were a mom and mom organization that God has just blessed and allowed us to make a big impact on women in the church. Regardless if you're married to someone in ministry, if you yourself are on staff, if you yourself pastor, there's a wide variety of what that looks like. But one of the things when we actually launched the organization, we were both pastors' wives. And then about halfway through, Leading and Loving actually turned 15 this year. So about halfway through is when my divorce started. And
Mhm.
I was no longer that pastor's wife, but I was a woman in ministry. And I remember her very clearly saying to me, titles and roles can be taken from you, but no one can take God's call on your life but Him. So if you want to still do this, you can do it. And just that freedom of like, I'm not being sidelined
Mhm.
was huge for me. So
Absolutely.
how can I help other women realize that regardless of the hurt and pain they've been through, that they are not sidelined and they can still
Mhm.
serve in the way that God has called them, that they can pursue the purpose that He has planted in their heart.
And what, I have goosebumps right now because I'm just thinking, you start this in this organization for ministry, women ministry leaders or women who are pursuing their calling.
Mhm.
And you start as a married life, and now we have one who's married, and now you who have gone through this pain of divorce, who can both of you can relate to women in different stages, and I'm
Yeah.
sure that you can minister in a much more powerful way because, like you said,
Yeah.
the calling does not change, whether
Call.
or not you're married or single, it does not change. And so you certainly can have a bigger impact in the kingdom for women that are in any type of walk of life or stage of life right now. So I love how God uses our brokenness to
I
just
do too.
bless his
So
kingdom. I
great.
love that so much. Well, let's talk about your book a little bit longer. So, can you share with our audience like a little bit about how your life looked like before your divorce, and then what did you lose immediately when your husband left, and then what did you lose more gradually?
Mhm. Um, yeah, immediately when my husband left, I I definitely lost that role that I had been filling. Once he was gone, when I was, the pastor's wife, then the role of wife no longer exists. But in losing that, I lost connection to that community.
Mhm.
So that I feel like that was an immediate loss, and then that was also a gradual loss. Both of those things are true about that. Other immediate loss were just having a partner in life, and then a family unit where there was a mom and dad represented. All of those things were my immediate loss. I think there was also a loss of security,
Mhm.
and safety.
Yeah.
There was a loss in not knowing what was next. I felt like I had way more questions than I had answers. And then there was a loss of just I think there was a loss in just the comfort of being able to trust people around me. Um, I when a position, a senior pastor position, um, kind of falls apart the way mine did, there's a ripple effect of the hurt that is caused.
Mhm.
And it didn't just impact me and my children, it impacted a lot of people. And because
Mhm.
they were impacted, then it impacted their relationship with me. So it wasn't just trust that was lost in a marriage commitment, it was trust that was also lost in friendships and working relationships that was really hard for me to navigate.
Mhm.
Um, Long term, I would say the loss of the church, and not because of that position or that title, but because of that community. That was
Mhm.
something I continued to navigate. I felt like God was really generous and kind to heal my grief in regards to the loss of the man that was my husband. But the grief of losing the church community, that took a really long time, several years. And it's something I tried to navigate as healthy as possible and figure out. And sometimes I figured out where I was based on mistakes I was making by trying to re-engage again. It was what was kind of difficult about that is, it felt like every time I tried to re-engage, there was another secret that I was being told that had happened during my marriage, or a confession that was being made. So that just took a lot of time to heal from. So that was probably the loss um, that took the longest for me to heal from. And it kind of happened and unfolded over a longer period of time.
Oh, yes, I'm sure. Well, that's the thing is that you don't lose just a marriage. There's just so much more, right? That is impacted, especially in a situation like that where church is so much is so important to us believers,
Yes.
right? I mean, to me, um, I I'm the only one from my family here, so all my family's in Brazil. So my church is kind of like my family. So
Right.
losing a church feels like it's a grieving process.
Right. It was my spiritual family for sure.
Oh, Absolutely, absolutely. I went through that when we left our church of 20 years not too long ago, and it's not easy. I
It is not
understand that.
easy.
Yes. Well, but now on the flip side of that question, right? You lost a lot of things, but I know that you gained a lot of
Oh,
things as well.
for sure.
You know, so what are some of the things that you gained when your divorce was final?
Yeah, I think, gosh, we could talk about that a really long time, Patricia. I did. You were so right. I gained so much. I think the first thing I would say is just the relationship I have with all three of my sons. They are now 22, 19, and 17. So I have one in college, one on his way to college this fall, and then a high schooler. And there was something about us starting over that allowed me to recreate some values for my family. And one of those values was truth. We tell the truth. I can deal with just about anything if you tell me the truth of the situation. So when we moved into the house that we live in now, it became my house of truth. And we have lived in a home where truth wasn't told, where deceit happened, where manipulation happened. We don't do that anymore. We live in a house of truth. And that truth just allowed us to be able to connect at a deeper level. It allowed that vulnerability. It allows us to fully show up. Laughter is another value of mine. I just wanted a home where we could have fun and laugh. And I have gained the fact that my home is not just a safe and comfortable place for my boys, but also for their friends. So I get to have a lot of kids in and out of my house. I think Jesus multiplies the snacks like he did the fishes and the loaves. I don't know how I keep up
I
with
agree.
teenage boys and all that they bring to the table, or all that they eat while they're at the table. But my home is just fun and easy and safe. And that is a really huge value of mine, that people who are in my home feel like this is a safe place. So we tell the truth, we laugh, and this is a safe place for us to be who we are. And that was a huge gain for me. I think another gain for me is, because of some of the rejection and abandonment that I lived through, I live with this little t truth in my life that I am just too much and that someone is not going to love me enough to not leave me. And because of that, my strategy was like, I don't show up fully in relationship. I don't show up and choose to be vulnerable because then I could be hurt. And that is something I've had to work through. I've had to
Yes.
work through, like, I am not too much. I'm exactly who God created me to be. I've been able to, step into my identity, because it's one thing to be given a new identity. It's another thing to walk in it. So like, if I've
That's
been
right.
given a new name or a new identity, I want to step fully into that. So being able to deal with some of those lies that I had been conditioned to believe and those strategies that I'd used to keep myself safe, and choose to deal with those so that I could step into my life with God's big T truth of who I am and who he has called me to be, and show up fully, allowed me to have deeper connection with the relationships that I have, with friendships, working relationships, relationships I have in my neighborhood. My neighborhood's a super close community. So the way I can even show up as myself in this neighborhood has changed. And yeah, that's a huge gain for me to actually be myself and create a life that I've loved to live.
That is beautiful. I love that story. And it's very true, right? God is we know that that there's a lot of gain as
Mhm.
well. If he has allowed something like that, it's for our good.
Yes.
And so you just have to use the right perspective to be able to grow into that new, really at the end of the day, when we are married, when we're mothers, we our identity sometimes a lot is just is that. I know I'm the wife of Steve's wife,
Yes.
and you have to be so careful because that is just one thing that we are. We are first
Yes.
of all child of the Most High, and He
Yes,
wants us
for
to
sure.
have an abundant
An
life, and
abundant life, a
to
full
be
life.
who we are, that He created us to be. I love that. Well, you talked about your kids. By the way, we have kids about same age. Only I have
Oh,
two. I have two girls. So I have
okay.
I have a 21-year-old, almost 21, in college, and a 17-year-old. So I
Oh,
have
yeah,
a
we
high
do have
school.
kids the
Yes,
same age. Yes.
exactly. So I'm talking about kids because parents who are going through a divorce or moms who are going through a divorce. That is a huge concern,
Oh,
right? Is how much this is going to impact, their children. So, what wisdom uh, would you share for parents who are just wanting to minimize the impact of divorce in their children's hearts?
Yeah, yeah. I love you asked that question. I think part of the reason this book is entitled Better Than Okay is because I feel like in all of the women I've talked to over the past 6 years who are walking similar paths, one of the questions they ask is, am I going to be okay? And then the second question is, will my kids be okay?
Mhm.
And I think, our kids are definitely impacted by divorce. My kids have been impacted by divorce. I think part of what my struggle has been in that realization is that if I am going to trust God to use this scenario in my life to develop my character and to step fully into who He has called me to be, I have to also trust He's going to do that in my kids' lives. And for our children, that is really hard to feel like we want to hand that over to
Yeah.
anyone, God included. I had this moment with God. It has now been probably full 6 years ago. I don't know that my divorce was final, but it was in the process of it winding down. And I was in the other house that I'd lived in when I was married. And I was just having a quiet time and I was reading the story of the Israelites crossing the Jordan at flood stage. And um, reading through that passage, which I've read so many times. I've done that on the flannel board when I was a little girl in Sunday school. Like that, this is not a passage that is new to me at all. But the way I was reading at this time, I just felt like God grabbed hold of my heart, and I was overwhelmed. I was overwhelmed with the fact that I was doing this all alone. I had to, emotionally carry my kids through the trauma of a divorce. I was now having to, be the sole financial provider of my family. I was worried about how their emotional health would be when they finish this. How is this going to impact their relationship with God? How is this going to impact their relationship with the church? What does this mean for them when they're old enough to consider marriage for themselves? So I was overwhelmed with all the impacts that were happening in my children's life. And I was reading this passage, and the story as well, Patricia, but the river, the Jordan, opens up, and they carry the Ark of the Covenant to the center, and they are standing on solid ground, and all the Israelites pass by them, and they land in the promised land. And I just saw it with a different set of lenses, where God said, like, hey, Brandi, you are trying to do what is my job. Your job is to stand on solid ground and to hold the truth of who I am. That's it. It is my job to part the water. It's
Mhm.
my job to hold back the river. It is my job to deliver your kids to the promises that I have for their lives.
Wow.
And in that moment, I I just knew that God said to me, you might be a single mom, but you are not parenting alone.
That's
And
right.
I was so broken and so hurt and so desperate that I needed God to tell me that He had my kids.
Mm.
And that visual has just stayed with me, to when things get rough, I go back to, it is God's job to deliver my kids to the promises that He has for their life, and have to re-hand over them to Him on a regular basis.
Wow, this is a word not just for divorced moms. This is a word for every mom out there because no, I really believe that, and not just mom. I think any trial that you go through, any hardship, I think everybody can really take this visual that you have just shared with, which is so powerful. Again, a passage very well known, but God revealed it to you in a very powerful way. It's so true. Our job is just to follow His lead, and He does the miraculous, and He's the one who protects our children.
Yes.
And I say that um, it's very children when they're little, it's like it's one thing. When you went through a divorce, your kids were at that stage that it
Yes.
had to be even harder because right at that stage where kids sometimes naturally start doubting God, that
Right.
stage of from teenage years to adulthood. And,
Yes.
that's a
Yes.
very, so I can only imagine how trying it had to be to your mom's heart.
Oh, it broke my heart. And I got to the point where I would ask myself, like, is this response because of the divorce, or is this response because they're a grumpy 16-year-old boy?
Exactly.
And to be able to say, okay, they would be doing this regardless of the divorce. This is because they are at that stage in life that can be a little difficult to navigate at times,
Right.
which actually, helps relieve the guilt a little bit. I talk to
Mhm.
girlfriends who have healthy marriages and their kid is going through something similar. And it's like, this is not something I've quote unquote done that has caused this in them. This is them just developmentally being a teenage boy.
Yes. Well, you talked about a word now that will touch on my next question, guilt, right?
Guilt.
So, okay, so you face a divorce.
Mhm.
How hard is it for you to get to a place where you can say, you know what? It's okay. I have done all that I could
Mhm.
in this marriage.
Yes.
And you feel a woman out there who's struggling with this. And she probably needs to hear from someone to say that God, sometimes He will give you the okay for a divorce, to file for a divorce. So, would you speak to that woman?
Yeah. And I think I'm glad you asked this question because I do think that is sometimes where the church does get a bad rap because we're not supposed to get divorced. Um, and, Patricia, there's so much to say on this. And I just have so much empathy for the woman that you're talking about. I do. I know that I am better than okay now, but there were a lot of days in the darkness of this where I woke up wondering if I was going to be okay again. So this is written out of my story because it is the story that I was allowed to live. So I just have a lot of empathy for that person. And I think upon reflection, divorce is not what ended my marriage. Betrayal is what ended my marriage. Lying is what ended my marriage. Manipulation is what ended my marriage. Infidelity is what ended my marriage. It was not the divorce. The divorce was actually the piece that um, I now realize gave me some freedom,
Mhm.
freedom that I didn't even realize I needed. So for that woman, I think, that's where often the Bible is quoted back to us. And I remember people with really good intentions stopping me in a coffee shop and saying, like, I've been praying that he's, going to change his mind. And I'm like, I don't want him to at this point, you know? But I think for that woman who's wondering, have I made the right decision? I get that. The guilt of like, what have I done to my family? That is really hard. And I think that is where you have to lean into God. And as when I started and I said, I gave God my doubt, my frustration, my anguish, I really did. I'm the type of person, so much was happening publicly in my life that I kind of just had to zoom in and keep things really small. And the person that I chose to communicate with the most was God. And I didn't just communicate the good things.
Mhm.
And it was in that suffering that he could show up and take what I was giving him. So I think that healing, that God and the Holy Spirit wanting to walk with us is such a gift that we have to be willing to just spend time with him. And if that means spending time with him is yelling and screaming and saying everything that you want to be able to say that you probably can't, then show up that way. It is
Right.
not, I don't want to ever have written this book and someone think that it was easy, because
Right.
this isn't easy at all. There's nothing easy about walking through divorce. There's nothing easy about starting over. um, and the grief you talked about is something that just creeps up at times when we don't expect it. But to have the freedom of being able to live the life that God has called you to live, and you're not in someone else's shadow, you're not living a life where you're being betrayed and manipulated and lied to and spoken down to, that is a life of freedom. And getting through the dark times to be able to find that freedom is definitely worth continuing to seek God in your life and the healing He has for you.
Absolutely. We have to remember that it takes, it's an old saying, it takes two to tango. And if
Takes
the
two to
other,
tango.
if the other person just continually says no
Yeah.
to God's promise of marriage, to, to the covenant of marriage, and to respect and to honor the vows that he or she made on the day that you married. Those are very serious vows. If the other person continually is hurting you and even preventing you from being everything that God has called you to be or
Yeah.
wants you to be, I agree with you. I think that the church needs to be more merciful,
Yeah. Yes.
towards the people who are struggling in this regard. And now, as we reached the end of our interview, which I would love to talk to you longer, but I know you have other places to be. And but I just wanted you, like, just as we end this interview, I wanted you to share anything else that you'd like to share about this book. Maybe there's a girl out there who's facing a broken marriage, and what would you wish to say to that? If you were sitting across from young Brandi, right,
Yeah.
when you were young, what would you like to say to that woman who is in the midst of a broken marriage?
Yeah, I think, of course, I would apologize for her pain and apologize say, I'm sorry for what you're walking through. I'm sorry for the hurt that you've been caused. I'm sorry you weren't loved the way you were supposed to be loved. And I think I would just want to encourage them that they're going to start to feel like themselves again. And they're going to be, one day, they're going to realize I'm smiling and haven't smiled in a really long time. Or I just had a really great time at lunch with a friend, and that hasn't happened in a while. So you're going to start to see glimpses of yourself again.
Mhm.
And on those hard days, just keep taking care of yourself. I think it is one day at a time. We don't have to figure out what it looks like in 6 months. We don't have to figure out what it looks like in 6 years. We are called to walk through one day at a time and do what you can to take care of yourself today and to take care of your kids today.
That's beautiful. Well, this is wonderful. Brandi, what a wonderful resource for women out there who are facing, divorce, or who have already gone through it and are still trying to find their identity even. They're struggling to find a new purpose in life.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for writing this book.
You're welcome.
Bye, Brandi.
Bye, Patricia.